The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. Bringing you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
SMU has never seen an offense like Baylor's.
And can Baylor finally stop the run for the life of them?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
An Old Southwest Conference battle renewed again up at Ford Stadium in University Park this Saturday morning. Get the alarms ready on the CW at 11 a.m. Baylor looking to bounce back. SMU looking to make it 2-0 after a trip to the college football playoff last year. Let's take a look at what Kevin Jennings can do after what Jackson Arnold definitely did to Baylor last week, and whether I was maybe right this time and SMU hasn't seen an offense like Baylor's. We'll look at the bright spot there. And both these teams already week 2 with some crucial names on the injury report. We'll go through who might play and how big of a difference that'll make in this game. All that and more coming up on this Locked On College crossover. Grayson, obviously looking at these two teams week 1's, like very different level of competition. And so with Baylor, I can take a look critically at how they looked against a pretty good team, maybe a team that looked better than I thought they were going to, but facing a team like East Texas A&M, formerly A&M Commerce, you get the win. A win's a win. 42-13 is 42-13. How much do you take away from games like that before we look at this game on Saturday?
Well, my philosophy has always been when you're playing against far inferior competition, you got to dominate in the trenches. And what I saw was SMU on the offensive line move the East Texas A&M offensive line. Line of scrimmage getting reestablished 3-4 yards down the field. And then on the defensive line, they didn't get moved. They had a dude, Terry Webb, in the middle of their defensive line who was just completely immovable, made a couple of plays, had a sack. So when it comes to evaluating those kinds of things, that's really what I'm looking for. Skill position players did their thing. God, SMU was sloppy. They were sloppy as all get out. I mean, 6 penalties in the first half. You turn the ball over. They turned the ball over 3 times against East Texas A&M. Not something you thought you would hear, but by and large, they looked okay. They looked good enough in the trenches to where I say, okay, they validated where they are ranked right now. They've validated that they have a chance to get back to the college football playoff. And it's week 1 with no preseason. Things are going to be sloppy anyway. So all in all, pretty good. What'd you think about, y'all played an actual competitive team? I mean,
yeah,
it was entertaining to say the least. I'll say that.
Sure. And one of the defenses definitely looked competitive for sure. It just wasn't ours. It did take me by surprise, man. It did. Like, I wasn't one of those people that was like, Baylor's way more talented than Auburn. I got sick of people saying how much more talented Auburn was. I thought it was a closer gap. But I was stunned at how ineffective they were in the run game. Mostly on the defensive side. Offense, you were down 2 scores in the first quarter, and it was like that most of the night. But I was stunned at how much they couldn't contain Jackson Arnold. I really thought Dave Aranda, 8 months to get a game plan here, knowing what Jackson Arnold can do, and maybe more importantly, what he can't do. I thought you'd tie an arm behind his back, and you didn't. You absolutely didn't. I mean, 140 yards on the ground, a couple of touchdowns, just at will, and they ran for 6 yards a carry the whole night. Arnold throws for 108 yards, and they win by 2 scores and score 40 points on the road almost. So it was just a brutal takeaway for me. I do like the offense. I still do, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But I got to say, Grayson, I'm really worried when I look at and what Dave Aranda said earlier this week. Kevin Jennings does a lot of the same stuff that Jackson Arnold does athletically. Arnold's a bit of a bigger guy, but Kevin Jennings can really make plays with his legs. But Aranda says the thing that's different is Jackson Arnold gets out of the pocket with the intent to run. Kevin Jennings gets out of the pocket and he can run, but he really has the intent to pass, to make a play in the pass game. So maybe it's a little bit easier to put a spy than it was for Jackson Arnold, but it's still another guy that you have to defend. What do you think about that assessment, having watched that Auburn-Baylor game on Friday?
Well, I tell you what, the fact that Dave Aranda couldn't look at the Oklahoma-Alabama game from last year and come up with a game plan for Jackson Arnold is a crime in and of itself, because the game plan that Auburn just ran out and bludgeoned Baylor with was exactly what Oklahoma did to upset Alabama at home last year, late in the season. So to me, that's a little bit inexcusable. When it comes to Kevin Jennings versus Jackson Arnold, here's what I think you have to realize. Jackson Arnold is 40 pounds heavier than Kevin Jennings. I may be overselling that, but you get the point. SMU's not going to run a whole bunch of quarterback power with Kevin Jennings, who's a little bit more wiry. He's 6'3", 195 pounds. They're not going to be running him like a fullback into the Baylor defensive line. What Kevin Jennings does is what you just highlighted. When he gets out of the pocket, he is still a threat as a thrower. Jackson Arnold's going to look to get north and south, where KJ, he's going to like matriculate around and kind of keep his options open, looking for somebody to sling it to. So in terms of that, Baylor, I think, is going to be more susceptible to the over-the-top plays from SMU. And SMU hit East Texas A&M with a couple of them. But one of them was on a Kevin Jennings rollout, and Jalen Cooper sneaks out behind the defense, long touchdown. I think that's where Baylor's going to be susceptible if they let Kevin Jennings get out of the pocket. Because unlike Jackson Arnold, Kevin Jennings is still eyes downfield like a pro-style quarterback looking to get rid of it.
Yeah, and you saw that on Saturday, and certainly saw that last year in the college football playoff run as well. If Jackson Arnold could do that, man, Oklahoma might have been in the semifinals last year. But he's not exactly Kevin Jennings when it comes to that. And looking at that, the Jennings numbers look fine, look good actually, and obviously it's a pretty comfortable win. But having watched the game, I would say there was some ups and downs. Maybe it was just uneasy watching it. You talked about the turnovers in there. Are we starting to see the seeds of, maybe not bringing back a ton of the quantity of guys from last year, and now one of the quality guys hurt? That's a really, really stupid and not easy to follow way to put it that I just did it there. Because we're going to talk about the injuries later. But yeah. Did it have the seeds of like, ooh, man, this just isn't the same team from last year?
It did on the defensive side. On the defensive side, it definitely did. And they lost Ahmad Walker and Kobe Wilson, their top two linebackers, top two tacklers from last year. That's where it looked like you were missing stuff. Offensively, they didn't really lose a whole heck of a lot outside. They lost a couple of wide receivers, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. And then they lost their leading rusher, Broussard Smith. But in terms of the things that were popping up, I don't think they were directly correlated with the dudes that they lost. They returned left tackle Savion Byrd, who was, I think an atrocity would be a little bit hyperbolic, but he wasn't good at that left tackle spot. And where you see it was that left side where the blindside rusher came and got Kevin Jennings for the strip sack, one of the turnovers that SMU had. So that to me wasn't a correlation with the dudes that they lost. It was just, I don't know if the tackles are as good as we otherwise, especially on the left side, thought they would be. So that would be a way where Baylor could probably get them. But other than that, in terms of the stuff that they lost last year, SMU's done a pretty good job replacing them. Now, one of those replacements was Jordan Hudson, who looked like he snapped his arm off on the first play of the game. But the run game looked, it looked terrible. But the run game looked good, and the run blocking looked so good. And then Kevin Jennings is just going to get better and better. He's going to get more comfortable. So in terms of replacing what you lost, I don't have any concern, especially on the offensive side with that.
Yeah. So real quick, so you like where the run game was at? The leading rusher had 44 yards, and you're okay with that? You're liking that?
Well, keep this in mind. It was 44 yards on 7 carries. So they divvied up the carries between Chris Johnson Jr. And T.J. Harden and Derek McFall. And look, the first two had a burst. They had a burst and they had a wiggle. And again, week 1 games are so weird. Like the stats can sometimes be misleading, but the averages per carry, if you take Kevin Jennings and the one run that Ty Hawkins had out of it, so take the quarterbacks out of it, SMU ran the ball 26 times for 124 yards. That's 4.95 yards per carry. More than satisfactory by most football standards. So yeah, I feel more than comfortable of where the run game is.
Okay. All right. And you're feeling okay with that run blocking as well. I mean,
Yeah.
part of this too, no excuse for how bad Baylor was in the run defense. They faced a PFF top 10 preseason offensive line as well. So, that part has to be put into it, I guess too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel more than comfortable, especially going up against. Look, SMU's offensive line is not Auburn's by any stretch of the imagination. They are not as big, they are not as good as Auburn's offensive line. But the way Baylor just could not, I mean, they couldn't offer any sort of resistance to.
I would love to offer some resistance, Grayson. I would. But I can't. I wish I could right now.
I mean, hell, you and I could have played up there in run support and maybe offered the exact same as what Baylor. I mean, it looked bad. And if you're Baylor, here's where, and I want you to hear your take on this too. Mm-hmm. If you're Baylor, here's where you can get got. If you start giving up chunk run play after chunk run play after chunk run play, what do you become susceptible to at that point? The play action pass. And even though Jordan Hudson is out, SMU's got plenty of speed at wide receiver to get behind the defense. And we know that because of that speed, Baylor's going to have to play at minimum with that too high, which means it's going to be a lighter box for SMU to run against. And if you can't get stops with your front six or your front seven, all of a sudden everything else gets opened up.
You know what? I might have to disagree. And here's why. Here's why. Because Auburn ran for 300 yards on Friday night, and Dave Aranda didn't get out of the too high the entire game. So he is so committed to not being beaten over the top on the play action pass that might be why. You might run for 300 more yards, but damned if you're not going to beat those too high.
But so fine. That basically means he doesn't want to get into another track meet, which he already got in a track meet playing too high. Like that is like that's an issue if you get into a track meet and you're staying in a too high shell. Like that's not supposed to do. But it also does. The play action doesn't just open up deep down the field, right? Sure. It opens up the intermediate too, which SMU with RJ Maryland kicking out to wide receiver now and playing a lot in the slot. Matthew Hibner is a tight end that can own the middle of the field. And then you've got guys running crossers all around the place. You could still be susceptible to the play action path, even if you're hell bent on making sure nobody bombs you over the top.
Sure. And this is where I do think that, I mean, Baylor's tackling was awful. And I know every team starts at the same spot, but I'm going to say, like, from week 1 to week 2, there has to be a natural progression there. Like, it has to naturally get better. But again, everyone was starting at the same point, and Baylor looked way worse than Auburn did.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're back in Thunderdome, and we are talking about the Ole Miss Rebels versus the Kentucky Wildcats. And it's funny, Lance, our friend Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC decided to try and trigger me a little bit, and he did an episode about how Kentucky is going to beat Ole Miss this year. And I'm sure that he probably is getting some clicks trying to build up that game. I just don't see it. Everybody knows about Austin Simmons. Like before the break, you were talking about it. He graduated high school and reclassified 2 years forward. He already has his undergraduate degree from Ole Miss. He is a redshirt sophomore with a graduate patch on his jersey. That's absolutely nuts. And he is as close to a football professional. He was like raised to do it. I think Lane Kiffin talked about way back when Todd Marinovich at USC and all of that. And he said this is a similar type situation, a little bit different with David Simmons and all of those guys, but this guy was brought up to do it. I think he's going to be a guy. Keywan Lacey has a chance to be an absolute stud. One advantage that Ole Miss has this year that they didn't have a year ago is a running game, potentially with Keywan Lacey. And if Ole Miss can get the running game going, that's how you get that Kentucky defense tied up in knots a little bit. And defensively, Ole Miss did not move Suntaram Perkins around during Georgia State. They hid all of that stuff. We know that Pete Golding is going to move him around. This is the leading returning sacker from last season in the SEC. I think he's someone to watch because this is a game, as weird as it sounds, Kentucky winning last year, this game is on Lane Kiffin's radar. And they spent time in the offseason, extra work, breaking down Kentucky's defense and offense. And the last time he did that was last year against Arkansas and last year against Georgia. So that's something at least to fall back into the back of the brain.
Yeah, we know how that Georgia game ended, obviously, in Oxford a season ago. And yeah, definitely some big-time players for Ole Miss to watch. It's interesting to talk there about that Ole Miss running game. That's something that I've not even discussed here on the show yet, just about what happens if Ole Miss can run the football, if they're able to do so to average or even good effect. I mean, that's definitely going to put Kentucky out of sorts defensively. It will open things up in that passing game for certain. There are some players to note here on this Kentucky defense. I'm going to give you two here. There's a lot of different guys I could go to here, but I'm going to go to Alex Safari first and foremost. He had 13 total tackles against Toledo, a sack, 2 TFLs. The kid has just been all over the place. It's like a hybrid linebacker, defensive back tweener type guy. He is really, really solid in coverage, really solid in the front seven. He is all over the place, just a freak athlete. We'll really be excited to see what he does in the NFL. He's kind of our all-around jack of all trades type guy. He's somebody that Ole Miss is going to have to watch out for, both in the running game and in coverage. And then also a pass rusher here in Steven Souls Jr., who had 2 sacks against Tucker Gleason and the Rockets last weekend. Kentucky's pass rush, actually, if I'm not mistaken, had the highest PFF grade of any team from week 1, which to me is shocking. I mean, obviously they played really well against Toledo. I didn't expect it to be that good analytically. But that is kind of what Ole Miss is looking at here. It's Safari. It's guys like Steven Souls getting after the quarterback, David Gusta as well. You've got a lot of different pieces here on this front seven that can cause havoc. Will they be able to do so against Ole Miss, who, again, like we've been talking about, is significantly more athletic, is more talented, is better coached than what Kentucky saw in week 1? It's going to be a step up significantly in terms of what you're looking at on that offensive line and who's actually blocking for the quarterback. But this front seven, I think you could look at a number of players, but Afari and Souls are the 2 guys that I'm looking at going, man, if they can get going, if they can stay comfortable in this game, if they cannot get out of position, it's going to cause some problems for Ole Miss across the board. And then on offense, like you mentioned, Zach Calzada, not very good last week, 10 of 23, 85 yards, 1 pick, average 3.7 yards per attempt. I said this on my most recent episode. Look, if he's going to play like that again in the first half, I think Kentucky should pull him. They should pull him for Cutter Boley, and that may change up what Ole Miss wants to do. I don't necessarily even know if he's a player to watch, because what I think Kentucky's going to try and do is run the ball. It's going to be Seth McGowan and Dante Dowdle. Dowdle, a transfer from Nebraska, had a $129 and a touchdown last week against Toledo. McGowan had 78 yards.
From Picayune, Mississippi.
Yes, sir. On a little bit more efficient running. I think Kentucky's going to try and play ball control. We'll talk about this later on in the show. But I think on offense, forget the offensive line, forget the quarterback, forget the receiving targets. There are none for even Kentucky fans. They aren't out there. Forget Josh Caddis and Willie Rodriguez. Like, you've got 2 tight ends leading the room right now. Until other players show their name statistically, don't even worry about it. What you should be concerned about if you're an Ole Miss fan is whether or not Kentucky can establish any sort of consistent ground game. Because if they're able to do that like they were in spots last year, it's going to be ball control, milking the clock, playing time of possession. And that's not a spot you want to find yourself in if you're a Rebels fan against Mark Stoops. That is if they're able to do so. But those are the players I think that you need to be looking out for most notably. I'm sure it feels like every time I do any sort of crossover, there's going to be some random player that we don't talk about that ends up showing out and has an incredible game. I'm not sure who that player is here. I could probably go with a guy like maybe Kendrick Law, the receiving threat from Alabama. Maybe you go for him. Maybe you go for Jamori Macklin, the transfer from UNT, finally standing out at wideout. I'm not sure where Kentucky goes to find a spark here. Maybe he'll just pop up and we're like, oh, there he is. But as of right now, not a lot of star power on the offensive side of the ball to be excited about.
Well, one thing that you can look at, if you look at a path to victory potentially for Kentucky to make a run, there's about 4 runs in the Georgia State game that were explosive. And unless Ole Miss can keep that up, like you talked about, it turns into a rock fight. They drain clock. All of a sudden it goes from you getting 9 possessions to you getting 7 possessions. And that puts a lot of pressure on somebody like Lane Kiffin, who honestly wants to score a touchdown each and every single play. That's the way he goes. I think Mark Stoops talked about that in his press conference. If Ole Miss can avoid trying to score a 14-point touchdown, if Ole Miss can just stay on the field, because if you go 3 and out and throw 3 passes and give up 15 seconds worth of time of possession in that thing, it could look like the Tennessee game that they had 15 minutes of time of possessions a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Stoops wants to play a rock fight game. He wants ball control. He wants time of possession. He wants to put pressure on the other team by doing that. The way that Ole Miss gets on top of this is by getting the lead early. If you play Kentucky and you get up by 2 touchdowns, it can turn into 4 touchdowns in a hurry. But if you're not careful, you're going to look up and it's the fourth quarter and it's 17-15.
The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
So, John, I appreciate you hopping on here. Obviously, this is a fun week of the season. It doesn't feel right being in September. I guess this game's not in like November or something like that. But obviously, this is a big one. And anytime you have a rivalry game like this, to me, is what college sports is all about. It is about the rivalries. And I think you could argue this is one of the most undersold, underappreciated from a national perspective rivalries in the country. So what to you are some of the biggest, storylines and things you're excited for in this game?
Well, to me, just from Missouri's side, there's been some kind of breaking news here injury-wise. Missouri's place kicker is out for the season, Blake Craig. So Eli Drinkwitz, a guy who typically doesn't go for it on 4th down a lot. Are we going to see more aggression against Kansas, especially in a big spot? Bo Pribula, a guy who can run the ball. It looks like Ahmad Hardy is a heck of a running back, too. I think it kind of fits what Missouri likes to do. And overall, kind of my biggest storyline is, on paper, I think most people would agree Missouri has more talent. But, man, I hate to say this. It hurts me deep in my soul to give you any credit. But really, Lance Leopold can coach, and Jalen Daniels can play some football too. And really, correct me if I'm wrong, Derek, I think this early matchup kind of favors Kansas a tiny bit from a Daniels perspective because, well, he has been banged up sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is to me kind of going to be, how do both defenses stop the quarterback run? Because we've seen when Jalen really gets it going and when Kansas is in bigger moments, bigger games, which for them, I mean, this is as big as it comes this season, right? You're going to be using that option in Jalen's legs a little more. And then in the games where maybe it's a little less, like last week, he only has 3 carries because you don't want to use those carries up for a guy who has had some injury stuff in the past. And then on the flip side, Bo Pribula, I mean, obviously a very good runner. KU in the past has struggled defending the quarterback run. It's a new defensive coordinator this year, so I don't entirely know how that's going to go this go around. That's going to be like a huge part of this. And, you mentioned the kicker being injured. If it's a close game, that could factor in. KU's linebackers are all beat up, like Bengali Kamara being out right now. Joseph Sipp is already out. Like that could hurt you against the run. It certainly is interesting that we're only in, I guess, week 2 of the season, third game for KU, second game for Missouri, and there's already injury stuff that's kind of popping up to this point in time. And I think that's what, going back to the idea that this game's in September, I'm going to be very interested to see the repercussions of a game like this for the following weeks. Now, Kansas has a bye after, so maybe that helps them a little bit there. But like, do you expend so much physical and emotional energy, both teams on this game, that it hurts you for a week or two after?
Possibly. And, I think the schedule lands pretty well for Missouri in that case, too. Missouri doesn't have a bye, but they do have Louisiana before playing South Carolina in week 4. Some of you listeners may have noticed that, Louisiana lost to Rice 14-12 in week 1. So that not looking like quite maybe as of a tricky, trap game upset as maybe it did early in the season, I would say.
Yeah. And so when you talk about like, what does this game mean for the season? Obviously it's no longer a conference game anymore. So from that standpoint, either team can lose this game and theoretically go play for a conference championship afterwards. So maybe that gets rid of some of it. But again, if this is the whole point of college sports, why it was started, these regional rivalries, and obviously this being the first time they've played in almost 15 years, it almost does mean everything while not meaning a lot else at the same point in time. So what to you does this game mean in terms of the season for Missouri?
Well, just in terms of how the season is going to play out, I think Missouri has, just as it did last season, just certainly in 2023, they had a great season too, but Missouri has playoff aspirations, whether they say that out loud or not. I think 10-2 is the goal. I think you lose to Kansas in week 2, regardless of whether that's a conference game or not. I think that really puts you behind the 8 ball. And somewhat amusingly and naively this week, Bo Prabula said, well, gee, I thought this was just a sports rivalry, but wow, it turns out there's a lot of hatred going on here. I just thought that was funny just to hear his perspective on it. But seriously, though, I do think it matters a lot. Again, it's been 14 years, almost 15 years. Who takes this rivalry the most seriously? Who is gung-ho for this thing? Because in the past, there's been upsets on both sides for decades because, hey, we'd love to just ruin Kansas's season and vice versa sometimes. Is there going to be that level of hatred in the stands? Absolutely. And on the television sets for all the viewers? No question. On the field, that's what I'm really curious to see.
Yeah, you almost wonder if like the crowd is going to be the ones that ignite it in a real
and that
way,
helps
right?
Missouri too. I mean, the crowd's going to be electric. There's no doubt about it, and that alone should juice the Missouri sideline, but really it should juice the Kansas sideline too. They have beating hearts and blood's pumping through their chests too.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great too that we get these, back home and away as opposed to
Yes.
There was something about it being at Arrowhead, but I don't know. It's something about it being on campus makes it nice.
Much better. Listen, the Armageddon game, that was incredible. A sellout. The 2008 game was obviously not as great for me, but still well attended. Other than that, man, the attendance really dropped in those things. To me, keep it on campus.
Yeah, no, it definitely adds to the intrigue and the fun and everything. Well, I think this is really important because, from the Kansas perspective, like this game almost becomes not just about Kansas. I mean, I don't think KU fans really care like, oh, we have to hold the water for the Big 12. But from a Big 12 perspective, the rest of the conference is like, hey, we need this more so than the SEC. Like, if Missouri loses to Kansas, the SEC is going to be just fine. The SEC's
That's an
PR is
interesting
going to be
point.
just okay. But from the Big 12 perspective, it would do them a lot of wonders to nab one on the road against an SEC team. And so, I don't know who ends up winning the Big 12 at the end of the day. TCU looked good. Utah looked pretty good in week 0. I think if Kansas wins this game, you're going to start talking yourself into, at least I am, the Kansas can win the Big 12. They can at least compete to win the conference because you mentioned from a talent perspective. I mean, from a talent perspective, we'll see if Missouri ends up being as good as like say Utah or TCU, but from a talent perspective, certainly they're just as good, if not better than some of those schools. So like, you can make the argument this is the most talented team that Kansas is going to play this season. And from that perspective, if you can beat them on the road, why can't you compete for a Big 12 title in addition to what it would do for the Big 12 in terms of just that, I don't know, public perception, especially after kind of an up and down week one?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I as much as I hate to even imagine the scenario where Missouri loses, of course, yeah, if Kansas wins this game, of course they're going to be right in there in the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is, I mean, give me 7 or 8 teams, I could see them winning the league at this point. And sort of to that idea, I think no matter who loses this game, it's going to feel like to the fans your season is over, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't, because that's college football. A lot can change as the season goes along, and we may look back and say, wow, actually, those were 2 top 20 teams or something like that. Who the heck knows? In fact, right now, the projections aren't too far off from that. I saw S&P Plus has Missouri 16th, Kansas 25. So, again, on paper, that's not a horrific loss either way. The problem is when it's Kansas and Missouri, it's going to hurt bad for somebody.